government did we have? Whoops. Thanks, Justin.
Sorry about that.
Um, no, it's all good. What kind of government or what, excuse me, what was the document we were operating under prior to the Constitution after we'd won the Revolutionary War? Does anyone remember?
You mean the Articles of Confederation?
The Articles of Confederation. So, Justin, what was wrong, or anybody, what was wrong with the Articles of Confederation?
My understanding was it would be more of like what Europe is, or like the well, yeah, or more like what Europe used to be, where the
Right.
states would all be essentially separate countries, and it wouldn't be a harmonized nation. We probably would go to war with each other a lot sooner than we ended up doing, and all that kind of stuff.
No, no, that's exactly right. So what you had is you essentially had 13 different countries. They weren't they were no longer colonies. They were their own separate country. And look, I think if we're honest with each other, we could understand the knee-jerk reaction to that, right? This is a people who were probably not probably, they were definitely coming out of a very tyrannical system. And that system left no room for the people to operate on their own. And so there's this knee-jerk reaction, right? And that knee-jerk reaction is keep power um as close to the people as possible, right? And that's a good thing. And we're going to talk. You're not a United States at that point. You are simply a collection of 13 different countries that happen to inhabit the same continent. And it led to a lot of chaos. It led to um, problems with money, right? Imagine, and I was just back there, so I was thinking about this when I was back there actually. Take Vermont and New Hampshire as an example. Pretty close together, right? You can drive across there in probably an hour from one state to the other. But back in the old days, despite how close they were, and look, it took a little longer to travel, but still they were very close together. You couldn't take the money that you made in Vermont and spend it in New Hampshire. They would just not recognize it. And so you have problems that way, right? Countries that are that close together, that are that separated in how they administer things, leads to chaos. The other thing is that I think the founders recognized early on that this would be a way that other countries could come in and disrupt what the founders had originally intended, which was to at some point get to be a United States. And so, like a state like Pennsylvania, it could be surrounded, by different monarchies, right? You could have Spain coming in and trying to lay claim to one of those or whatnot. So the founders understood that, hey, we got some problems here and they need to be addressed. And so that is essentially what spurs on the Constitutional Convention. Now, I want to share a little story here about that before we dive into what it is the founders ended up giving us. And my favorite founder of all is George Washington. Um, and I think it was Jefferson that summed him up best. He said he wasn't the most intelligent, he wasn't the most articulate, but his honor was above reproach. So if Washington said something, you could take it to the bank. And so as Madison is recognizing all these problems, and a lot of the founders are, Madison understands that they're going to have to get all these leaders of these different, essentially city states, to come together in Philadelphia and try to hammer out a new constitution, a new form of government. And they go to, he goes to all the big names, right? The Adams, the Jefferson wasn't there; he was overseas. They go to uh, uh, um, oh, I'm sorry, Franklin, all those other big founders, right? And he kind of lies to him. Not kind of, he flat out lies to him. He says, "You guys should come." And there's some consternation, right? There's some folks saying, "Gosh, I don't know if I want to go." And Madison, to kind of lure him in, he says, well, George Washington's going to preside at this. And then everybody is on board. Now, this is all well and good, except for Washington doesn't know that Adams is making this claim. And so, as he's just a week or two away from the convention, he's like, I guess I better go talk to George now and see if this is going to work. So he goes and he ends up um, talking to George Washington. He says, this is what's going to happen, and I kind of told everyone you were going to be there. And Washington is pretty perturbed. And Washington says something that's profound. He says, "Have I not yet bled enough for my country?" And I think it shows his character that he just wants to go back. He's done his service. He just wants to go home and be a farmer. Nonetheless, we know that he goes. Now, we don't know how the decision making went on this. We have no clue at all. But there is a very interesting journal entry from Martha. And I read it, and I can't prove this. I'm not saying this happened, but boy, it sure feels right. And all it says is spent hours with the general this night in the parlor as he was very unsettled. And I could only imagine that she was like, look, you're going to go. You can't not go. It's who you are. And that next morning he saddles his horse, he saddles his carriage and makes off for Philadelphia. But this would be a collection of men who really didn't agree as much as we think they are, or what we're led to believe. These were men of high integrity, high intelligence, and they were going to argue things to the death. But through that conflict, which would be Philadelphia, the Constitutional Convention, they give us our Constitution, which today is the longest operating Constitution in the country. Now, that doesn't mean that it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they gave us a heck of a head start. And to do this, they essentially borrowed from two places. And the first place that they borrow is Anglo-Saxon common law. And now, this one, I can't verify for certain, the seal here, but I'm pretty certain that this was going to be the seal, part of the seal for the first seal of the United States. There's two parts to it. And these are two prominent Anglo-Saxon men, Hengist and Horsa. I believe they were brothers. And it was just kind of a nod to it. It played a huge part. Can anyone here tell me who the Anglo-Saxons were? The Anglo-Saxons were essentially the Vikings. And they the interesting thing is we always think of Vikings as those guys who are out there, marauding and pillaging. And look, they did that, but they also had some interesting ideas on government. And so some of the things that they borrowed from the Anglo-Saxons were things like, oh, excuse me, it's not working here. Here we go. So out of this, there comes what's called people's law, right? And under this Anglo-Saxon kind of ideal, they were considered a commonwealth of free men, right? They weren't subservient to each other in the same way we would think of with kings and stuff. They certainly had their chieftains and their rulers, but there was this idea that all men were free. They were considered a commonwealth of free men. Um, Leaders were chosen by the governed. Um, Laws were considered natural law or given by divine dispensation. Power was dispersed among the people. It was never allowed to concentrate in one person. Um, and then when it came to problem solving, there was a definite order that the Anglo-Saxons had, right? If there was a problem with a family or a person, it would first go from the individual to the family to the tribe, then the community, the region, and the nation. So it was this ascending order. And to give you an example of kind of how serious they were about this, this is what's known as the public land survey system. Now I'm going to get a little nerdy here and talk about what I do for a living. And west of the 13 colonies, Jefferson devised a system of dividing up land for people to purchase. And how he would do that is that he would take what was called a township, and a township was divided up into 36 square miles. And so you can see how they're kind of numbered here. They go from 1 to 6 here, drops down to 7, all the way down to 36. This would be the next township over. Now, what's interesting about this is that when Jefferson first devises his plan, not only is he saying, okay, this will be great for settling, but he also gives some instruction that these should be used as voting districts as well. So again, remembering that ascending order, when you were voting, you would vote, you know, here, and then the bulk of the 36, how it was divided, or if it was split, they would inform that, but then the township would vote, and then on up to counties and state. And likewise, it was supposed to work the opposite way when, if things ever got bad, right? That, okay, if the federal government ever went down, it would go to the state, then to the county, and then eventually down to these townships. But we've ignored that. The other thing, this, if we would have stuck to Jefferson's principles here, and I believe the principles of the rest of the founders, we would not have the problems we have now with gerrymandering, where politicians are dividing up voting districts based on where people live. If we'd have stuck to that system, it would have been there. But nonetheless, the overall point here is that the founders definitely borrow this idea of kind of an ascending order when dealing with problems. The other place that the founders drew heavily from was the Bible itself. This was going to be the other part of our national seal. And what it represents is the Exodus story. So here you have Moses and the children of Israel being led across the Red Sea with the pillar of fire and the cloud of smoke, and Pharaoh's armies being drowned in the ocean. And so these were men who borrowed from these sources. So we just kind of talked about what what they borrowed from the Anglo-Saxons. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what what they borrow from the Hebrew Bible. If the Bible itself is, interestingly enough, has a little bit of emphasis on liberty. In Leviticus 25:10, it says, "And ye shall hallow the 15th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." Okay, pop quiz, real quick. Where else does this part show up on one of our national monuments? Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. There is one American artifact that has this inscribed on it. Anyone want to take a guess?
Is it the Liberty Bell?
It is the Liberty Bell. Yep, it is the Liberty Bell. You can, in Philadelphia, they have it set in behind a glass case, but you can still go in and look at it. And interestingly enough, there was a second bell that was cast out of that particular cast, and I believe it is in ownership right now of a gentleman down in Texas who actually bought the second Liberty Bell and has it preserved in his private collection. My hope is that one day he will part with that, because from what I understand, it is still operational. It can be rung, and every once in a while, I believe there's plans this year of rolling it out in a celebration in Texas somewhere, where he's gonna put it on a wooden kind of plank and hold it up, and he'll ring that bell and sound out. I would love to hear it. Anyway, so yeah, they're borrowing from the Hebrew scriptures here. And the Lord is very clear here. He even criticizes or chastises Israel when they mess up. In Jeremiah 34:7, the Lord tells them, "Therefore, thus saith the Lord, ye have not hearkened unto me in proclaiming liberty, every one to his brother, and every man to his neighbor. Behold, I proclaim liberty for you, saith the Lord." Okay, so Israel was expected to walk up to liberty here. And if they didn't, the Lord was quick to beat them down. Now, it's more than just principle that the founders are drawing from when it comes to the Hebrew scriptures. They actually borrow some structure, and this is pretty interesting. So this comes from Exodus 18, verses 13 through 26. And this is a problem that's going on, is that Moses is kind of at this point acting kind of like a king. He is he's like trying to solve all the people's problems. And so he's kind of starting to wear down. And Jethro's going to come in and he's going to submit his plan, his idea for something. And so I find this real interesting. I want to read these because I don't think we can do it justice if we just glossed over it here. Let me go back one here and try to get rid of this screen here. There we go. Starting at 13. And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood by Moses from the morning until the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people, he said, "What is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone? And all the people stand by thee from morning until evening." Okay. So Jethro, and it's pretty interesting here. I want to make another connection. Most likely, I don't have anything that I can point to for certain. If someone else does, I'd love to hear it because I'm willing to be wrong here. But my thoughts is that Moses probably got ordained to the priesthood from his father-in-law. And so it's interesting that his father-in-law, who's kind of a priesthood man, is the one that's about to illuminate, the problem and then the solution. So Jethro sees Moses and he's just there morning to night hearing all the concerns of the people, all the problems that they have. And you can only imagine the problems that would be there, right? I mean, so and so, took my cow, or, so and so broke something of mine. And so Moses has to just sit and constantly mediate these issues. So, and going on in 15, and Moses said unto his father-in-law, "Because the people come unto me and inquire of God. When they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another. And I do not make them, and I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws." And Moses' father-in-law said unto him, "The thing thou doest is not good. Thou shalt surely wear away, both thou and this people that is with thee. For this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. Hearken unto my voice, and I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for the people to Godward, that thou mayest bring this cause unto God." Okay, so Jethro's illuminating the plan here. He's like, look, you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to wear out the people even. That's interesting that the people themselves would be wore out. And he said, hearken to my voice and be for your people to Godward, saying, okay, when the problems are that tough, look to God. That's your role. Going on in verse 20, that thou may teach them ordinances and laws, and shalt shew them the way wherein they must walk, and the work that they must do. And moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, a place such for them to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, and rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And let them judge the people at all seasons. And it shall be that every, let me move the screen here. Every great matter they shall bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge. So shall it be easier for thyself, and they shall bear the burden with thee. If thou shalt do this thing, and God command thee, then thou shalt be able to endure. And all this people shall also go to their place in peace. So Moses hearkened to the voice of his father in law and did all that he said. And Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And they judged the people at all seasons. The hard causes they brought unto Moses, but every small matter they judged themselves. So what does that kind of sound like? Does anyone want to take a guess here? Taylor, I saw you made a response.
Oh, sure. I was just putting in the chat a few things. So first off, the reference for Moses, he was ordained by Jethro. It's not recorded in the Old Testament, but it is in section 84, verse 6. And in fact, another interesting note that who was it? Tim was asking about is because I just mentioned that it's interesting to me that Jethro's line of authority is contemporaneous to Abraham's, but it's a separate line. And it's actually in section 84. I'll just read a few verses. It gives the priesthood line genealogy. Jethro received it under the hand of Caleb, who received under the hand of Elihu, who was under the hand of Jeremy, who was under the hand of Gad, who was under the hand of Isaias. And Isaias received it under the hand of God. Isaias also lived in the days of Abraham and was blessed of him. So Esaias was apparently a peer, another king and a priest in the days of Abraham, and they knew each other, and he received a blessing at his hand. The other thing that I wanted to point out here is the parallels between these verses that you just read with the revelation that the Brigham Young received about the organization of the camp of Israel as the saints moved from Nauvoo out to Utah, organizing into captains of hundreds, captains of fifties, captains of 10, with the president and his counselors at their head under the direction of the 12. That's in section 136, verse 3. And it's the emphasis is about the covenant that they will walk in all the ordinances of the Lord in verse 4. I just see some striking parallels to these verses that you just read. This is from Exodus, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's all I
Yeah.
had.
No, that's great. I think it's also interesting to point out, and I'm trying to find the reference here, and I didn't write it down, and I wish I would have. But um, there is a section where it does talk about that leaders were elected, and you can find that in Second Samuel and Chronicles 29, um, and Second Chronicles 10, and that the people also voted on new laws as well. And so there's a tradition here within the Hebrew scriptures of you know keeping power and governance close to the people, and that's important. Why is it important that government stay as close to the people as possible?
Well, the
Huh.
opposite of that would be like Pharaoh, right? They just got out of Egypt. They've just been under this totalitarian government system.
Hmm.
And in that kind of a system, if you're a Hebrew slave, you have no recourse. There's no justice. The law can't defend you. It can only be used to hurt you.
Absolutely. Anybody else? It's interesting. Having lived all over the country, I've had the opportunity. I mean, I've lived in Alaska, I've lived in Idaho, I've lived in Utah, North Dakota, Maryland, and now Missouri. And the one thing I find interesting is that each state has its own unique characteristics, and along with that, its own unique problems. And so, if you were trying to govern a land and a people as diverse as Americans, to try to impose a one size fits all solution on those problems, it's not going to work. And so, by keeping the government close to the people themselves have the opportunity of looking and saying, okay, what are the issues here and what can we do about it? that also provides a nice framework of not only being able to address the problems from those people who are affected by it, but also those folks are going to be way more sensitive to the needs of the people within any one jurisdiction. If we wait for DC to make all the laws, we have to look at the problems that DC is having, right? I use the homelessness problem a lot in this argument here. We hear people from like major population centers a lot of the time say, well, we need to allocate more money for homelessness and for social programs and these sorts of things. And folks like the majority of us who live out in the country, right? We tend to be like, well, we don't have those problems. And so what you get is an overbearing federal government that wants people who don't have those problems to pay and fix problems of somebody else. And it makes no sense. And quite frankly, it tramples on rights. And by keeping the government close to the people, you can get rid of some of that. Now, the founders, they drew from other sources as well. These weren't the only sources
Dave?
that they drew from. Yeah, oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I
Sorry,
didn't see it come off mute.
Yo, you're good. Before we move on from that point, I just want to tie it in to King Mosiah before
Mm-hmm.
before his death and kind of succession, because he was the king, and he was a great king. You know, talk about the ideal situation. If you could have a king like Benjamin or Mosiah or Jesus, you know, we wouldn't need to worry about elections and keeping power less centralized, or having too much power focused in one person. But because King Mosiah recognized the tendency of men, if it's a kingship, it's usually a genealogical, so it's just passed down to the sons. And as we saw with wicked King Noah, that can have catastrophic problems. And so it's real good to. So King Benjamin proposed. He's like, not only is it not fair to the people to just be at the whim of, oh, hopefully we have a good king, but if his son's a scoundrel, then we're kind of screwed. That's not fair to the people, but it's also not fair to the king to have so much burden of responsibility. And so he proposed a dispersion of that focused power in one person. And he said it was to make men accountable for their own destiny, to have individual say and influence in the affairs of the nation, rather than it's just the one guy making all the calls and calling all the shots, right? So I think that the centralization. So as you know, everybody's probably familiar with the expression, "Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely." When you have a king, that is absolute power, and it can have a very corrupting influence. And so I'm sure King Mosiah even struggled with, like, do we don't really have the full record of every dealing and judgment that he made, but I bet he had personal experience, and that's why he's like, it's not fair to the king either to have to bear that whole weight of responsibility on his own. And so he proposed the people have say, and he was kind of instating some of these Old Testament laws, precedents that you have mentioned, like from Second Samuel, the involvement of the people in uh, submitting. They have to have consent, they have to have a vote, they have to have a say before new laws get passed. The other thing, and this is backing up just a little bit, I just wanted to comment. You were talking about where are the origins of the Anglo-Saxons. Um, the Anglo-Saxons are, and many other European tribes, like the early, like Dark Ages types of tribes, have actually been traced to some ancient civilizations that no longer exist. But the
Mm-hmm.
archaeologists are discovering they're called the Scythians or Scythians. It's Scythians, and the Cimmerians, which is with a C, Cimmarans. I'm pretty sure that's how they're spelled. And the Scythians and the Cimmerians came out of nowhere, so to speak. There's no archaeological record that like can trace back exactly, but they just came, and then they were there, and they had quite highly developed societies and economies and all of these arts and all of these things that they're finding these relics and artifacts from these ancient civilizations. but they emerged right about where the Romans dumped the Israelites from the northern kingdoms after they took over in about 600 BC and destroyed the temple and all of that sort of thing. So it's really interesting that the Romans did forced relocations to try to nip in the bud any kind of revolts and things like that. And so when the or not Romans but the Babylonians, and Romans did this too, but so like some of these ancient empires to try to quell uprisings from these newly conquered territories, they would do forced displacement. And they weren't unnecessarily harsh. I mean, obviously they had no say; they had to do it. The soldiers were making them move, but they guarded them along their journey and all these things. So we have records of where these tribes of Israel were moved to, but then they disappeared, and that's why we call them the Lost 10 Tribes. But right about where these Lost 10 Tribes disappeared, the Cimmerian and the Scythian ancient civilizations just came out of nowhere, quote unquote, and thrived and built up these civilizations. And so I actually am quite personally convinced. I could be wrong, but there's a lot of compelling evidence, in my opinion, that these are actually Israelites, the Anglo-Saxons, and even the American founders, the George Washington, Jefferson, Franklin Adams, all of these
Mm.
guys are actually of the blood of Israel, but they've lost their identity. But that's why I think that these Anglo-Saxon and these Old Testament uh, precedents and the way they organized themselves in their societies spoke to the American founders, and they patterned a lot of the constitutional principles of our nation upon these ancient structures. So that's just another kind of thing I almost shared earlier. I thought it was probably worth mentioning.
Absolutely. No, I'm glad you went there. I didn't do that research. I just wanted to identify where they are. But I'm glad you brought that up because I think it does add more credence to that scripture we read in Genesis where it talks about Joseph growing over the wall and it'll be a fruitful bough, right? I do think that we can find evidences that um that definitely takes place through the Anglo-Saxons and the other names that were given to them. It's fascinating stuff. Thanks, Taylor. I appreciate that. I was going to save this part to the end. I think that now that we've had a little bit of discussion about kingly government, I want to throw this out here. There's a quote by Franklin that says, there is a natural inclinations in mankind for kingly government." Why do you think that is? Why do you think there is a natural inclination towards kingly government?
I think there's probably two answers for why we're inclined toward that, or why uh, people as a whole would be inclined toward that. I think the first and probably the most obvious is that natural man is inclined to offload the responsibility to somebody else and let somebody else make the decisions for them because it's easier for them. But the other thing too is that uh, a dictatorship or a king is a very effective government. And so when
Mm.
you have an external threat, you want a powerful government. I think both of those play hand in hand.
No, I think you're 100% correct. I think, look, for guys who look, I can definitely zone out with the rest of everybody else, right? I want to be clear. I'm not saying I'm immune to this, but it does make it easy, right? And in a weird way, I think we've done this with the two-party system in America, where we can just say, you know what, somebody else has that problem worked out. They'll fix it, and it allows us to be entertained with bread and circuses. And so I think it's one of those things that we constantly have to fight that part of us who just want to roll that off to somebody else. So how do we guard against these inclinations in our own lives? How do we make sure we don't become susceptible to accepting the rule of a one man or a king?
By being willing to take upon ourselves personal responsibility, by not offloading that to somebody else. Uh, what do they call it? Extreme ownership.
100%. So, yeah, oh, that was a great book. Did you read that, Tim?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, it's a good book. Okay. I 100% agree with you. A lot of times, as people who are maybe more in favor of limited government, right? We don't want to have government trying to solve every single problem. That means that we have to look at our rights and understand, and this will come up again and again throughout this book as we go through it. We have to not only look at our rights, but look at the responsibility that goes along with that right. And if we flex our responsibility as well as our rights, we won't need a big government. One of my favorite presidents, aside from Washington, um, is somebody that most people kind of like raise an eyebrow at. He was labeled a do nothing president, actually, and it was Calvin Coolidge. And Coolidge was entering office. I can't remember who it was that was assassinated before him, but he gets into office because the president was shot. He was vice president. And as he is taking the oath of office, he takes office by candlelight. But when he leaves the White House, in most American homes, there's now radios and cars. It was a fantastic leap forward. Now, what makes it even more impressive is that when Coolidge comes to power as president, when he's sworn in, America's starting to go into a really bad depression. Um, and they ask Coolidge, "What are you going to do?" And he says, "Nothing. I'm going to leave it alone." And it got worse for a minute. It got way worse for a minute. But by leaving it alone, he allowed the market to correct itself. And what came out of that was essentially the Roaring Twenties. And there's been some fascinating research done as of late to suggest that the Depression in America was called the Great Depression, but it took us the longest to come out of it because we kept fiddling with it. And it was actually government intervention that caused the Great Depression in the first place. And so there's this idea here, right? That if you can just leave it alone a little bit, let people do their thing and and exercise their rights, people will figure it out. The other thing Coolidge did that I really liked, there was a horrible flood down in Texas during his administration. And um, Coolidge was asked, are you going to send federal monies down there? And Coolidge says, no, I have faith in the American people that they will do the right thing. And he was right. The rest of Texas and neighboring states came to the aid of that area in Texas and helped their brothers and sisters out in that area. But I think that's because people in that time, they not only were familiar with their rights, they were familiar with their responsibilities that were associated with those rights. Sometimes we like to yell and jump and scream about our rights when we haven't bothered initiating what our duty is in terms of keeping the responsibility of that right. So, like today, if we look at the First Amendment, our right to free speech, that is fantastic. We need that. But what's the responsibility of free speech? Does anyone want to venture into those waters? I think it's to be informed. I think it's to make sure that we are spending adequate time familiarizing ourselves with whatever it is we're going to speak on. Now, you can speak regardless of that, but if we're going to exercise that right, I do believe there's a responsibility that goes along with that. Likewise, if we look at the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, I think the responsibility there is that you are a responsible gun owner, that you you have your guns stored in a safe place and that you are familiar with your firearms and know how to use them. And so we look at all these things, all these rights that we have, right? But there are corresponding responsibilities, and they'll be illuminated later in this book. But I do think that that is a huge part of the problem that we face today. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add on that before we move on? Okay. So what comes out of the founders' research and the Constitutional Convention? And I do want to say that the founders did borrow from other sources. It wasn't just Anglo-Saxon law and the Bible. They looked at Greece, they looked at Rome, they looked everywhere for examples of good government and tried to collect as much as they can. And what they come up with is a system that is, while certainly you can look at almost every part of the Constitution and say, well, that's really not unique, right? We've heard about this in other places. But this is the first time that a group of men got together and said, let's extract all those ideas and see if we can encapsulate them into one form of government. And in the book, it's Skousen kind of, and I love the way he did this. He kind of makes a symbol of the type of government we got. And it's the three-headed eagle. And we're going to go over what each one of those symbols mean in this crest here. So we'll start here on the left side of thing. Here you see this wing, and Skousen calls this the problem-solving wing. On the right-hand side of things, the right wing is called the conservation wing. And then up here you have the powers divided up in America. You have the executive branch, which would be president, the House and the Senate, and the judicial. So let me ask this question. If we were to kind of split this eagle down the middle here, how is this right side kind of the conservation wing of the federal government? How does the judicial tie into that?
Well, the judicial
So I
branch
think
isn't, they're not making laws and they're not enforcing laws. So they are the far more methodical branch. Their jobs are to deliberate. Their jobs are to I don't know that I can say it better than I already have, but uh, to judge is to basically keep what you have and make sure it's well understood, as opposed to creating
ex-
something new.
exactly. Exactly. I didn't mean to cut you off, Tim. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries, no worries, I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, so when a new law gets passed, the last place it's got to go through is the Supreme Court, the judicial wing. And the judicial wing's whole responsibility is supposed to be, is this constitutional? Right? And so you can look at that conservation side of the government as trying to protect the rights of the people, trying to make sure that all these laws are going to be copacetic with the Constitution. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I kind of disagree with Skousen here with putting the Senate up here now, today. I think originally, I think it was supposed to be on that side. But who can tell me what the issue would be with the Senate today, as opposed to what the founders originally intended the Senate to be?
Popular elections.
Yes, yes. Why is that important? Was that Justin that said that?
Yeah, yeah.
Why is that important, Justin?
Well, because the Senate originally is intended to represent the state
Mm-hmm.
government, not the people in the state necessarily, but the government of the state. And that's a kind of a check against potential overly progressive ideas that could be reckless, right? Somebody's got
Absolutely.
this great new idea. His name's Marx. we ought to give this a shot, right? And the people might be in an uproar about something like that, but the state government should be more focused on stability, and they're the ones appointing the senators, and so the senators a lot. I mean, not nearly as much as the Supreme Court, which are appointed for life, and but are also appointed, right? We don't vote for Supreme Court justices either. We weren't supposed to vote for Senate. We would vote for House, and then we had this, complicated system for the executive. But yeah, that tends to create more stability and more long-term interest perspective than you get when it's just, man, I can't afford a house. Let's vote this guy in. He says he's got a solution.
100%. And so the senators were essentially appointed by the governors of each state. And I can't remember what law it was that changed that. But on the
17th
surface, you
Amendment.
could. Which amendment was that, Taylor?
The 17th Amendment passed in
17th.
1915.
Thank you. What it did is it essentially turned the Senate into the House, right? And that's not like there's nothing wrong with Congress, with the House of Representatives. But if the Senate was able to be the stopgap between an encroaching federal government, it's a healthier check. And I understand that there's a knee-jerk reaction because we've been conditioned to think of America as a democracy rather than a republic. That, well, if they're democratically elected, they will absolutely do a better job of governing. And I don't think that is necessarily true. I'll be honest, I would like to go back to having senators appointed by the governor. I think that it might make for a cleaner separation as well. Likewise, that senator is going to still be beholden to the people of his state because he's going to have to answer to the governor, and the governor answers to the people. And I do think it would be an easier way of unseating senators too when they run amok. So let's go over this left-hand side of things here real quick, and let's talk about this. So here we have Congress, or the House of Representatives. We have the executive branch, and this is looked at more as the problem-solving wing. And I want to get some people's ideas on why Skousen maybe would have used that as or likens that to the problem-solving ring of things. And Vanessa and Charisse, don't feel bashful. Feel free to hop in here anytime you want.
I think, you talk about the problem solving wing. It's like that's the side of change where you're looking for something new or you're looking to do something different. The conservation wing likes to keep status quo, likes to keep things stable. And then the problem solving wing is more dynamic, I think. And so I think it's kind of like a duality of natures. And so they have different qualities that we need. It's like flexibility and strength. It's you can't be too flexible or you'll fall apart. You can't be too rigid or you'll be stagnant. And so I think it's a very balanced perspective.
Oh, I think you're 100% correct. That was great. I appreciate that, Vanessa. No, 100%. I think if either one of these are out of whack, we're going to have problems, right? I would dare to say that today we're probably, well, I don't think I can just say it. I think I can say it with some absolute certainty. This branch of government has become way too powerful. And what ends up happening is that things get passed because this branch outweighs this branch here today. They're not equal anymore. Is that we tend to get more progressive ideas, right? And look, I think we all like progress. That's not a bad thing. But I don't. When it comes to principles, if your progression is not checked by making sure it's staying within the original confines of protecting human rights, protecting liberty, those liberties and rights are going to get trampled on. And I think that's what we're seeing today. But let me say this. If we were too heavy on the right side of things, well, now all of a sudden we're not getting anything done. We're not innovating. We're not trying to find the solutions to problems. We are just stagnant. And so both of these things have to be in play here. And Vanessa, I love what you said. And Justin kind of talked about this. I believe it was our first class when he was talking about um, progressives versus conservatives and how Justin kind of, and forget, Justin, correct me if I'm wrong here. You said you kind of consider yourself more of a progressive in terms of not maybe how we use the word today, but the word in its truest sense, where we were always kind of looking forward, right?
Right. Well, I mean, what we've got, how many, how long has abortion been implanted as legal in our society? You look at the welfare state, all this. I mean, from when I was born, I'm a younger guy, right? And so I'm looking at America now, and the stuff that the liberals got away with has now become the status quo. And so I kind of look at that as, I'd say that like that left wing kind of got broken and that middle head is leaning way to the left. So,
Absolutely.
but on the other hand, you know, I think correctly the left wing there wouldn't be the problem solving wing. I think it would be more fair to say that's the progressive wing, right? But that
Hmm.
people have wrong ideas about that a lot of times. And I kind of tend to consider myself more progressive today because I'm more focused on solving problems because we're kind of in a Marxist trap right now, and I don't want to conserve that. I want to get away from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I I've often compared, the plan that the founders had put forward with divided powers and whatnot, in kind of like a suspension bridge. And if you've ever seen a suspension bridge, they're actually kind of really cool to look at. And if you can stand back a ways, if you can gain perspective on that bridge and actually be still for a moment and just watch that bridge. I remember I first saw this. Gosh, it was in the Pacific Northwest somewhere. I think it was up along the Columbia, right there as it kind of divides Oregon and Washington. And there was a suspension bridge, and we actually had to go out in a boat and get some shots about a quarter of the way into the river because we were looking for high water. Um, so we take a shot on the bank and then go out. But we anchored, and I just kind of watched the suspension bridge. And as cars would drive over it, it would flex, but it never flexed enough to where if you were driving on it, you would feel it. But I thought, man, the balance that's got to take, right? Because if it's too rigid, it's going to have weight that goes over the top that's going to crack the structure. If it's too loose, every wind that comes along is going to rock it and then start the process of momentum taking over, and it's going to rock that bridge, and it's going to eventually snap and collapse. And so I do believe that in these things, we're looking for a healthy tension, right? How do we keep things strong, but yet flexible? And I think that's exactly what the founders were going for here, is that in this in this system of government, it was designed to be strong yet flexible. And I think we've lost not only that strength, but a certain amount of our flexibility too. And I think as we look around today and we see some of the problems, it's because we have a lack of that healthy tension. And so, in order to get back to that, I think we do have to look back this time rather than forward, and progress this time might be going back and reinstituting the the original idea there. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add to that?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
It's been interesting in studying the human body in the field of fascia research and other things. There's a model that's been brought forth that describes the human body as a tensegrity machine, meaning that we're a combination of rigid and flexible. It's like a toy that has wooden dowels connected by elastics that you kind of squish
Hmm.
it, but then it pops back into its shape. But I think these principles exist within our human body, within our government. I think they're very important to keep everything healthy, whether it's our body, whether it's, the nature of female and male. It's why we're commanded to be married, is because it brings that balance. It's not just one side. It gives the other perspective. And anyway, it's just very interesting that it exists on all the levels, and it's what we need to stay healthy and to stay adaptable to whatever's going on in the environment.
Absolutely. It's also worth noting here that the founders were concerned enough about the executive branch having the flexibility they needed in a national crisis that they kind of made the Marines um, the president's personal, I don't want to say army, that's not right, but the president can do things with the Marines for a short period of time. To go to war, it takes an act of Congress. But the president, at his disposal, always has the opportunity of dispatching the Marines for a certain period of time. Tim, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that still the case today in the United States? Do you know you're in the Navy, right?
I'm aware of of emergency powers that the president has across all branches of the military. I'm not aware of anything unique about the Marines, um, but that could just be something I'm not aware of.
Thanks, Tim. I'm gonna look it up here real quick. But yeah, if I'm not mistaken, um, he can dispatch them for a certain period of time without Congress declaring war. Um,
While you're looking that up,
and
I'll just ramble a little bit about. I think all branches are pretty. It's pretty well understood that the president can activate any branch for anything that he can justify as an emergency up to, I think, 90 days. It's
okay,
for
yeah,
safety of our shores, safety of American interests abroad. But I don't. I think that's Army, Navy, Marines. I think that's any branch that he has that ability to do that with. And so, if there's something unique about the Marines, I'd like to hear it.
yeah. No, I'll try to look it up, and if I can find it again, I'll put it on there. Or if I misread it, I'll own up to that too. Um, and so we do need that flexibility because if we don't have it, we're going to snap. At the same time, we just can't be blown about by every wind of political doctrine. And so that conservative wing comes in real hot and heavy. So that pretty much wraps up this section. We've gone for just a little bit over an hour now. And I knew this one would be a little shorter because we covered part of it last week and didn't get a chance to go all the way through. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add before we wrap this up? Okay. Perfect. Then with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up for the night. Um, Taylor, would you mind giving us a closing prayer?
You bet. Our Father in heaven, we come before thee tonight to give thee great thanks for all of our blessings. We are grateful for the legacy that we've inherited from our founding fathers and those generations that have gone before us. We ask thee to help us to be able to learn these principles and let them sink deep into our hearts, into our children's hearts. Help us to teach them and prepare them for their generational responsibility. And please let us preserve these principles. We know that you hold the destiny of nations in thy hands, and we don't have the control that it would take to be able to make great macro level changes, but we ask thee to help us and bless us and prepare us for that we can set our own homes in order and that we can teach our children and use our influence to lift and elevate and educate and inspire those around us in our communities, that we can instill these principles deeply into thy gospel and into our communities, and that we'll one day be able to establish thy Zion upon the earth. And we pray for those who are in power, that they can have thy spirit and yield to their better natures, and receive good counsel and make good decisions. And we thank thee for this class and opportunity to come together and discuss these ideas, and seek to better understand them and learn from one another. And we love thee very much, Father, and pray for all those who are sick or in need at this time, and that they can recover and have what they stand in need of, and that those who are in mourning can be comforted. And we say these things humbly and gratefully in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thanks, Taylor. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Dave. See you guys.
See y'all.
Thanks, Dave.
See ya.